Right, welcome to Society Work and Development Institute breakfast. Apologies for the delay in starting time. At times we do, as other people elsewhere face technical glitches, but we do sincerely apologize for the 10 or so minutes delay. My name is Sonabile Mrwana. I'll be introducing the speaker for this seminar presentation today. Dr. Carly Forrest. She's a former trade unionist and also former editor of the South African Labour Bulletin, and she's a prolific author and has written among others books. One of them is Asijiki, A History of South African Commercial Catering and Allied Workers Union. And another more recent one is Metal That Will Not Bend, National Union of Mine Workers, 1980, Metal Workers, sorry, 1980 to 1995. She holds a PhD from the University of the Witwatersrand, and she is an associate with SWAP, Society Work and Development Institute, and a former Ruth First Fellow. In 2014, she was a senior researcher for the Marikana Commission of Inquiry, Phase 2. And nobody is better positioned to talk on the topic today of the Marikana Commission, unearthing the truth or burying it. So I'll give Carly 30 minutes, then afterwards we shall have time for discussions and questions. And thereafter, we shall zoom out to enjoy our breakfast outside. Thank you very much. I'll give over to Dr. Carly Forrest.
Okay, good morning everybody. I hope you can all hear me, just shout if you can't. Before we start my presentation, I just want to show you a couple of quotations that were responses to the Commission itself and also to the Commission's report. The first one is from Dale McKinley, written in the Business Day, where he said, "Commissions are an expensive and largely cynical exercise in bearing the truth and protecting the powerful." And the second, from EFF Julius Malema, this was when the Commission's report came out, is that "I'm shocked and disappointed, and to me it still feels like a nightmare. And I still hope someone is going to wake me up from this nightmare, because I can't believe this is happening to the poorest of the poor." In my presentation, I'm going to first of all just look at what is a Judicial Commission of Inquiry. What are its parameters? What does it aim to achieve, and what can it not achieve? And then I'm going to go on to look at the Marikana Commission, look at its strengths and achievements, then onto its weaknesses. And in this, I'm going to be looking at both the Commission's proceedings as well as the final report of the Commission. So what is a Commission of Inquiry? Well, the Marikana Commission, I think, as probably most of you know, was a Judicial Commission of Inquiry. But at the time, before this started, it was contested. I wouldn't say strongly contested, but there were other ideas proffered. Some people felt that it should be a civilian commission, that is, that the commissioners should be expert civilians, maybe in policing, labor relations, sociologists who knew about migrant labor or whatever. There were others who felt that a TRC-type process would have been more appropriate. A process whereby we know the police did the shooting, so let them first just come forward, tell the truth in exchange for not being prosecuted. Then there were others who said, well, why don't we go straight to prosecution? We know who did the killings. But in fact, of course, we didn't know exactly who had done the killings, and we didn't know in the days prior to August the 16th exactly who had killed the other 10 people. Then, of course, the logical body that should have investigated the Marikana events was IPID, the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. But as most people knew, IPID is just far too close to the SAPS for it to have any kind of independence as a commission. So finally, the judicial option was put forward, and that's what I'm going to look at now. The President appoints a judicial commission, and the primary role of a commission, of a judicial commission, is to advise the President. It's not to inform the public or to help out with those who've been affected by the events of, in this case, Marikana. Its primary role is for the President to see what happened and to decide what she would do with any kind of recommendations that come out of the Commission. Commissions are supposed to encourage a much less adversarial environment than a prosecution court kind of environment. And this is supposed to be conducive and open up to people actually telling the truth. And there are a few things that are supposed to assist in this. First of all, evidence that is led at a commission cannot be used in court later. And secondly, it operates on a balance of probabilities, rather than it being, as in most criminal cases, you have to prove the truth beyond reasonable doubt. In favor of judicial commissions, they are supposed to be ostensibly independent from political interference, and that is very important that that is the case, because it's a judicial process, it's not run by the executive. And they're chaired usually by a judge, and judges are seen generally as being impartial, and of course in South Africa are guided by the Constitution. That's better, the public have confidence in legal procedures. They see them as fair, as giving all sides the ability to give their story and so on. But also, judicial commissions have useful mechanisms which are used, like they have search and seizure properties, they have the ability to subpoena, and of course witnesses have to give evidence under oath. Yeah. I'll just try and talk as loud as I can until it's fixed up. So witnesses have to give evidence under oath, and there are provisions within the Commissions Act that if you perjure yourself or you hinder or obstruct the Commission in any way, you can actually be charged. Judicial commissions, unlike courts, allow for an engagement by a wide range of parties. Unlike the sort of court approach, which is often mired in delays and minute legal argument, which is very alienating for the complainants, it is a much more sort of inclusive process. And of course, often in court cases, there's no guarantee at the end of it that there'll be any relief for the complainants, that there'll be any kind of compensation in this case. Commissions of inquiry are supposed to be transparent, and it's supposed to get behind the scenes so that we can see the practices of government and other institutions in the society, business and so on, which of course are usually very opaque. It really is a great opportunity to get behind what is happening in government and so on. The findings and the recommendations in a report are also extremely useful. They're useful for government, they're useful for various interested parties or campaigners to act on in whatever way they want to use it, because it has the authority and the weight of commission findings. But I think there's a lot of confusion in the public terrain. Commissions simply cannot implement such policies. They have no power to implement. They can simply make findings, and they can possibly make recommendations. An inquiry is also makes a major contribution to policy debate. It focuses attention often on a neglected area, which everybody in society knows this major event has happened. And so there is a focus on this area. It stimulates discussion. It makes people think around the issues of what policies should be in place around this matter. And commissions, I suppose, in essence, in summary, commissions investigate the truth, they inform and educate the public and government, and they make recommendations that may result in new policies. So as such, they play a role in strengthening democracy, and they play a role in ostensibly in good governance. So what were the Marikana Commission's achievements? statements, just in the light of what I've just spoken about, that commission, the parameters of a commission. Well, first of all, I do think the Marikana Commission was free from political interference, the actual process of the commission. The chair, I believe, was impartial, and most people and most of the lawyers involved thought that as well. Of course, Insebeza famously said that Farlin was not impartial, and he said this after the commission had ended. He was involved in the commission himself, and he said it after the commission was ended, so most people simply felt, or in fact one lawyer said to me they thought it was disgusting that he made those kinds of accusations without raising it at the actual commission at the time. So this impartiality maintained credibility for the commission, I believe. Judge Widgery was quite clearly biased right from the start. He aligned himself with the British troopers and he gave a verdict in their favour. And it was only about 20 years later when precisely the opposite verdict was given. We also all, most of us probably know about the Sariti Commission and how that's been very compromised by the chair. And I don't believe that it was the case with the Marikana Commission. I think the Marikana Commission was a transparent process. It had a very broad reach, and I think, as I said, commissions have this ability. It involved lawyers for the arrested, for the families of the deceased, for the injured. It involved lawyers who represented the Constitution, Benchmarks, which is involved in social justice issues around mining communities. There were obviously members of the public were welcome. There was a place where anybody could walk in at any time and listen to the proceedings. All the unions, 3 of the unions were represented. And of course the media was present. And I think the media is very important in commissions because they are really responsible for conveying whatever comes out of the commission to the public in general. And I think it really did expose the behind-the-scenes practices of the police and of Lonmin. Lonmin, for example, the transfer pricing arrangements that it had really got a very good airing at the commission. I do believe that the Marikana Commission revealed truths and revealed the general pattern of what actually happened on those days. And it certainly exposed certain myths. A lot of people have said, the commission was useless, nothing came out of it. I don't believe that is true. So, for example, it exposed the myth around inter-union competition. Very early on, I think it was mainly Lonmin, put out the narrative that UMCU was basically responsible for the violence, that it had engaged in trying to poach members from the NUM, and that violence had simply escalated into what finally happened at the large massacre on the 16th of August. I think it also exposed the untruth of the police narrative. The police got together before the Commission of Inquiry at the Roots Conference Centre, and they decided what their narrative was going to be. They knew there was going to be negative findings at the Commission, and they basically decided their main narrative would be that they were attacked by these out-of-control mine workers, and they simply had to open fire. That was completely discredited at the Commission. I think it also exposed a number of truths and a number of, really the broad happenings of what happened at Scene 2. Now, I think, as people may know here, Scene 1 was what was flashed on all the television screens locally and across the world, where we actually saw people being mown down. Scene 2 was exposed by a sociologist and a photographer afterwards. And this Scene 2, all the events that happened there, happened 20 minutes after the killings at Scene 1. 17 people were killed at Scene 1 and 17 people were killed at Scene 2. So there was a large and detailed investigation in the Commission around what happened at Scene 2. And I mean, just in brief, what they exposed there was that a number of public order police units then went behind the scenes and pursued the mine workers up to a copy behind the scenes. And here you had units who maybe one of the units fired a shot, all of them, some of them maybe, believing that workers were also armed. One fired a shot. They started firing shots at each other, believing that the mine workers were shooting at them. And of course the mine workers were in the center, and they were the people who were shot down, injured and killed. And the Commission does very clearly show that pattern. It's got very detailed information on what happened in the Commission proceedings, not so much in the Commission report, but in the Commission proceedings. I do think a wider truth was exposed, which you couldn't really expose in a court case, in a prosecution situation. So I believe, although it didn't take it to its absolute conclusion, the Commission did reveal that there was a chain of command, right up from top political people through to the top leadership of the police, and of course right down to the foot soldiers on the ground who did the shooting. I think it also showed that sort of gave a very panoramic view of the absolutely chaotic police operations that prevailed, both in Scene 1 and Scene 2. And again, there's a great deal of detail in the report on this. Further, it definitely exposed police and other mendacity. I mean, there was extensive lying at the Commission. So let's just take one example, which is an important example. At the very beginning of the Commission, the police gave the commissioners a hard drive of basically what had happened and all the documents and so on that they needed. And it was only a year later that Colonel Scott, under pressure, said, well, actually, that hard drive had been doctored, and produced another hard drive, which the evidence leaders then went through in minute detail and found that basically a conversation between the Northwest Provincial Commissioner and Barnard McQuaina, who was an executive of Lonmin, there was a recorded conversation between the two of them, and in that conversation it became very clear that they'd been given instructions by Ramaphosa to end the strike as soon as possible. You know, they both absolutely in agreement that this should actually happen. Why should they end the strike? Because there was a fear that the EFF were getting undue publicity, because the mine workers were responding very favorably to EFF overtures, and there was an election coming up in 2014, and they were very worried that the Rustenburg region would go the way of the EFF rather than the way of the ANC. Then, of course, they definitely, the Commission revealed all the dishonesty around the National Management Forum. There was a National Management Forum on the 15th of August, on the night of the 15th of August, the day before the big massacre, where it was basically decided that the operation would go tactical the next day. And that was completely hidden until a deep throat within the police told the commissioners about it, again about a year later. And the minutes of that National Forum have never ever been found. All other minutes of that National Forum are available except for the minutes of this particular meeting. So it's impossible to say precisely how detailed the planning was at that meeting. Then, of course, Mr. X's testimony was very much discredited at the Commission. Mr. X, I don't know if people know, was basically a police witness, but he was a mine worker who had been involved in the strike. He'd been up on the Koppie, and he claimed that he was one of the central people who had been planning the strike. And he was extensively discredited. Basically, he claimed that Joseph Matunjwa had been involved in planning to kill NUM people so that they could poach more membership and intimidate people, that the strikers were sort of crazed on Muti and that they were wanting to kill the police and so on. So this whole narrative came from, he said, because he was intimately involved in that planning, in that central planning group. And of course his testimony was discredited in all sorts of ways, which we can talk about later if we've got time. Also, they exposed the mendacity and extensive lying of Lonmin security and, of course, of Lonmin executives themselves. I think one of its great achievements was also that the report includes strong recommendations. A lot of people said, you know, it's not what came out of it, nothing came out of it. It is difficult. It's a very dense and opaque document, but there are some very strong recommendations in it. So there are recommendations, for example, which everybody knows about on police leadership, that the National Police Commissioner and the Provincial Commissioner had taken inappropriate political considerations into account in trying to deal with the strike, and as such they should be investigated for their appropriateness to retain their office. It recommended that there be the withdrawal of R5's automatic weapons, that they were simply not appropriate in any kind of public order policing, and that they should be immediately withdrawn. And of course there were extensive recommendations around the restructuring and training of public police. The report, I believe, was also strong on Lonmin and DMR failures, the Department of Mineral Resources failures. And they were strong on the fact that around Lonmin's non-compliance with its social labour plan obligations. In order to get a license, mining companies have to abide by their social labour plan that they put forward. And they particularly the Commission particularly focused on its housing obligations, and many people might know here that they promised to build 550 houses for workers between 2007 and 2011, and actually only built 3 houses. And this was condemned, and I think this was something that people really have not focused on, the fact that the Commission saw a relationship between the violence and the service provision by the company. Of course, Lonmin contested. They said, why are you looking at whether we provided housing and services to mine workers, whereas in fact what we're looking at is the violence that happened between the 9th of August and the 16th of August. But the Commission